Sitting is ubiquitous in our work culture. Did you know that 8 in 10 of office workers spend about 4 to 9 hours a day sitting at their desks, which means that they're sitting for 67 days in a year? And that's a problem because increased time sitting is one of the leading causes of mortality due to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and mental disorders. My research is about identifying the spatial attributes in workspaces that steer these patterns of sedentary behavior and suggesting design tactics to encourage workers to meet minimum physical activity requirements of accepted health guidelines. So, the aim essentially is to find out how we can improve employee well being in workspaces through spatial design. And the research is carried out by studying the floor plans of the IBM office and is supported by a survey of 100 employees from the same company. Measurements of sitting patterns of work tell us that out of the 66% of total time spent sitting, 5 to 20% of the occurrences are in prolonged duration. And for each hour of sedentary time, there's an increase in mortality risk by 2%. And this problem becomes all the more heightened when the same pattern continues in our other daily activities like riding the car, playing video games, watching television, and so on. Physical activity needs attention in our lives. And we spend a major part of the day in the office. So, if the office space can encourage movement, it can contribute greatly to the well being of employees. Especially at times when the outdoor climate might not be ambient for physical activity and you're in your office gear, indoor spaces in the office might help you improve the walking culture with some intervention. That is why it is relevant to our UAE context. UAE values integration of health and fitness in our daily routines, and there have been several efforts made. For example, Dubai is trying to be the bicycle friendly metropolis. But how can we extend this further into the routine, into office spaces where we spend a major part of the day? Currently, in a quest for efficiency, our workspaces have associated sitting at desks and staring at screens for a long time as a guilt free practice of productivity, of engaging in hard work. But it's invalid to say that the less people walk, that less salary is spent on wasteful walking. Nevertheless, quite unfortunately, while the layouts of spaces have been designed and organized considering evolving priorities, they have in most cases fostered a culture of resistance to move, especially the hierarchical desk layouts. Sometimes employees choose to have fewer breaks because they perceive leaving their desk as a disturbance or sign of distraction to their other employees, especially seniors. Did you know that 73% of office workers leave their desk for toilet or tea breaks only at the utmost necessity? Desk layouts, hierarchy in seating, workplace attitudes, all these put together make it so difficult to meet daily recommended activity requirements. To support the impact of spatial attributes on these trends, the floor plan of an IBM office building in Gurgaon was studied. I identified the spatial attributes, the desk layouts in this office, and generated projected movement patterns based on this. These patterns are then analyzed, and the same plan is used to demonstrate the application of simple design tactics that can significantly improve the movement patterns. And what are these design tactics? How can space encourage movement? My first question was, why do people move? And I found that people move to reach a destination, perform a task at hand, because they're bored or impatient, or just because other people are moving, broadly. But Jan Gell, in his book Life Between Buildings, he identifies three categories of activities that attract pedestrian movement that are useful to compare with workspaces. They are necessary activities, which are everyday tasks occurring in any and every type of weather, which in the case of the office would be the trips to key destinations like the kitchen, the water cooler, washrooms, print, and meeting rooms. Where we place these functions impact the worker's daily step counts. So, manipulating the distance and attributes of the pathways leading to these spaces can facilitate increased walking despite internal motivation of the employees. Spatial attributes like lighting, flooring material, edge variation, structure of the pathway, so on, especially removing the obstacles and improving the visual connection, can intervene and facilitate better connection for required activities. Next, there are the optional activities, which occur from a desire of participation in place and time, and they're usually unlikely to occur in the absence of basic conditions. They're the spaces in the office that are designed or informally adapted for collaboration, optional for participation, like the smoking area, the meeting rooms, outdoor leisure spaces, so on. For this type, the concept of nudging, which means creating unobtrusive alterations and spatial modifications to make certain behaviors more likely, in our case, healthy behaviors of walking, this can be used. And the last one is the social activities that's emerging from the congregations of public, which are more spontaneous and they're conditioned by the physical setting. So it's rare and not designed. It's not even identified in the office setting. The focus of this study is on Gell's second and third set of spaces that host spontaneous activities influenced more by spatial cues. Now, if these activities listed above become parts of something we call a zone, the first strategy is about creating these zones of activity and creating flow between them. We all know the difference in energy between two bodies can create transfer or flow between them. Similarly, the variation in intensity of physical activity taking place in different spaces can create movement and direct a sort of flow between them. For example, if you observe public spaces, you can see how pedestrians have the tendency to walk away from busy areas towards low density areas, or vice versa, depending on the nature of activity they're attracted to. A similar flow pattern can be induced in workplaces, and you can direct the flow where the zones of work, play, relax, so on become the nodes of this flow. And all of them are differing in the levels of physical activity, like leisure and collaboration, the highest, and individual work, the lowest. The basis of this segregation can be based on the size of activity, otherwise, on the level of peer and social interaction that's required, or whether it's done on an individual scale or on a collaborative scale, and the perceived overall interest of that activity. Having said this, it's important to know that even though some functions like meetings, discussions, light tasks can be performed on the go, majority of work done productively is done seated. So let me clarify that the purpose of this paper, the purpose of promoting physical activity is to support the performance of seated activity and not to make movement predominant in the workplace. Supporting this, a pattern language by Christopher Alexander alludes how and when a trip is classified redundant, dependent on its length, frequency, and the usefulness of the destination. This means that the layout and the functional adjacencies matter. The same activity but variation in the method of task, for example, switching between work styles, a change of posture, formality of the setting, or individual or group arrangement can greatly contribute to this goal. And my survey of 100 employees in IT desk-based settings carried out in October 2020 from a diverse locations like Dubai, Bangalore, Chennai, Raleigh, Canada, etc., captures data and trends of work-based behavioral patterns and employee preferences. And I found that employees do like switching styles and new ways of working, especially standing desks, walking meetings, and switching postures 1 to 2 times a day. Now, a section of the research also discusses the functioning tactics supporting the implementation of the design tactics. This comes from seeing the office as a marketplace of ideas. Creating a network between the employees, the company, and the workplace environment can create opportunity for the proliferation of ideas. If an office wants to improve productivity, then my study says you should expand the break rooms and allow for conversation with colleagues where they can circulate ideas instead of putting them in rows of desks. This is what British Telecom did, and their productivity shot up. The last section of my paper makes a comparison of spatial attributes in different topologies like a train station, the airport, or a street and relate contextually to our office. Now, the workplace is predominantly associated with sitting and inactivity with rare bouts of movement, but the street and train stations, they're largely movement orientated with occasional pause. Drawing principles from these spaces is useful to understand the drivers of movement and how spatial nudges work. For example, if you notice the layout of retail units in terminals of train stations and airports, they place very strategically. Although aimed at commercial gain, they create these points of attraction, and with the ease of access, they draw traffic based on visual gesture itself. Let's apply this to the office plan. And let's make the stairwells more accessible and introduce engaging activities, and their visual appeal is increased to encourage movement, so it's no longer just a fire escape route. Streets. William Wright, Writer William White worked to decode human response in urban conditions to find patterns and spatial attributes contributing to pedestrian behavior. And he found that in public squares, a void can be activated by adding activity, like a vendor, a food stall, or an interactive performance. These activity zones and attractor points that draw visual and physical attention by the nature of activity. This can be applied in central spaces of offices, like in intersections like corridors, wider open spaces, indoor and outdoor, and it can be activated by adding high intensity leisure activity to host office breaks, contrasting to the seriousness of work. Another example is paths. Paths with minimal edge variation have known to direct and increase the pace of movement. The variation in width affects the path and the structure of movement in the workplace. So you can make room for some intense physical activity as well as balance it out with slowed down moments of conscious productivity. This can be supported by the modification of pathway materials, creating a diverse experience by nudging the speed of movement and flocking densities. The various investigations of the IBM floor plan demonstrate the feasibility of these concepts, and they are supported by the survey conducted on working styles. Tactics are suggested both on a spatial design as well as functioning level to holistically approach the solution. This research is potential and can benefit greatly with further movement analysis to get real data on the movement patterns, to test out the design tactics and how they can be applied individually in office spaces over time, and it can give objective measures and help assess the above concepts. In addition, the relevance and impact of seasonal tasks and crunch time behavior of employees is an object of further exploration to refine more contextual spatial solutions. But let me leave you with a thought. If you know you're going out in the sunshine, you take measures to protect yourself, like using a sunscreen. So we know that employees need to sit down and do work at the office. Why not protect them with bouts of movement per minimum guidelines with well designed workspaces? Thank you.